Hello and welcome to our second Zoom session of our literary symposium, The Sanctuary, Art and Literature from Exile and Hermitage. My name is Friedel Schmoranzer and I'm the head of fellowship programs of Villa Aurora in Los Angeles. During our in-person kickoff on November 6th, Stefan Kepler-Tasaki gave us an overview of the authors who stayed at Villa Aurora during the last 25 years and the literature influenced by their stay. The word sanctuary as a keyword of the Exile literary community has been introduced, and thereafter Kevin Vandeman gave us insights in failed attempts to establish such a sanctuary. In our first Zoom session, Tanja Dückers gave us insights into her stays in different artist residencies and abroad, describing the experience of strangeness and loneliness as something subjective. For today's session, it's my pleasure to introduce Felicitas Hoppe. Felicitas has been a Villa Aurora Fellow in 2012, and on a personal note, as part of the first group of artists I was allowed to welcome in Los Angeles. I'm giving you a brief overview of Felicitas' impressive resume. Felicitas is based in Berlin. Her debut, Picnic der Friseure, was published in 1996. Her novel, Pigafetta, followed in 1999 after taking a world trip on a fried ship. She also writes children's books and has been a translator of texts by the American children's writer Dr. Seuss. Her most recent novel came out this year with the title Die Nibelung, ein deutscher Stummfilm. She has been awarded numerous prizes, amongst them the Aspekte Literaturpreis, the Bremer Literaturpreis, the Georg Büchner Preis. Felicitas Hoppe is also the first winner of the Große Preis der Deutsche Literaturfonds and has furthermore held poetics lecturing post and was visiting professor in Wiesbaden, Mainz, Hamburg, Heidelberg, Cologne, at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, at Georgetown University, and Washington, D.C. Welcome to the stage, Felicitas Hoppe.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the invitation.
Hello, Felicitas. I'm so happy to see you here and that you're part of our symposium with the text of the same name, Sanctuary.
So, well, I'm very grateful to be with you, at least this way. I very much would prefer to be in Los Angeles, remembering the good times we had about 10 years ago. It's a long time ago. So I was invited to write a text on the sanctuary. And well, would it be okay? I simply present the text right away?
Let's go right into it, yeah.
Let's go right into it, and excuse my English reading. I'm not very much used to read my text in English, but I'm trying to give my best. The title is simple, you just mentioned it. It's called The Sanctuary. All my life, I have tried to carry art somewhat more lightly. As a permanently traveling artist, following in the footsteps of those who have been there long before me, I have lived in borrowed farmhouses behind northern German dikes, managed vacant keepers' lodges next to abandoned railroad tracks, watched over the villas of dead colleagues on the Pacific, and slept in the beds of great deceased minds. Along the way, I have been to several countries where there are diseases that have not yet been named. But the truth is that I'm still dreaming of being a happy homebody who, if time permits, captures her inner world between two book covers in self-imposed solitude in a hermitage in the Swiss mountains. This may sound beautiful and privileged, yet a hermitage is not an ivory tower, but a place where absolutely nothing happens if it is not in constant communication with an outside world that productively overlaps with the inner world. Seen in the cold light of day, hermits do not retire so much as resettle. They do not leave this world to find rest, but to understand what happens to them in this world. It is not about withdrawing, escaping or retreating from the world, but about distancing yourself from it. As every sailor knows, you cannot experience a storm in the eye of the storm. There, It is famously calm and dry. Those who find themselves at the center of the action usually are the least likely to understand what's going on. The resettling recluse seeks focus through distance. This is how, at least occasionally, literature comes into being. Like any narrative, it lives from the awareness of the difference in time, from the distance in time and space that through its retelling transforms the past in order to grasp it in the present and preserve it for the future. Even in a time that is all about contemporaneity, simultaneity, and live streams, about maximum participation in the here and now, that is the dubious productive power of impatience, the desire for distance has remained. Why else would the time out be in such demand? In sports, time out means a break in the match to adapt the tactics to new circumstances or to respond to the elimination of a player through injury or misconduct. In behavioral therapy and education, we talk about stimulus interruption. In the work world, time out signifies a short-term release from the duty to perform on the job. In German, when we hear the word Auszeit, we mostly think of Urlaub, vacation, a term that in Middle High German simply meant the permission to take leave and to be temporarily relieved of one's courtly duties. No wonder that most artists have no gift for taking time off, not least because in the eyes of their beholders, they are constantly on vacation anyway, living quasi-permanently in time-outs with the support of grants and funding programs. The projection onto the artist is thus one of envy. Artists are seemingly free, nomadic human beings who, from Berlin to Los Angeles to many places in between, move from one subsidized hermitage to the next to devote themselves to their highly personal trials and adventures. Art, however, is not a time out, but an expression of a specific way of perceiving and being. This, however, does not change the fact that artists too are active business persons, the majority of whom to this day live precarious lives while expected to pretend that it is precisely these circumstances that make their lives particularly true and fruitful. High time to get to the core of a term that has occasioned my remarks, sanctuary, which has a surprisingly large semantic field. Originally a term to denote a cult space and a sacred space, it also means safe space, shelter, asylum and exile, retreat and refuge, shelter and protection area for people no less than for trees and birds. According to Leo's translation machine, even an animal shelter can be a sanctuary. So if we took the word literally, only that which we hold sacred would be worth protecting. But are artists sacred to us and thus worthy of protection? Let us come back to the term itself. While sacred spaces and cult places are sites for upholding tradition, hence shelters of a higher order, refuge, asylum, and exile appear in a completely different, namely a political light. Just like the protection area, they refer to a concrete threat, a state of emergency that has nothing whatsoever to do with a voluntary retreat. Those who seek refuge have been displaced. Those who need a safe haven come from captivity. Those who take shelter usually have to hide, and those who require protection have left a place of danger. All of them poor preconditions for the creation of art, which needs a sanctuary indeed. Quite often, however, the refuge, which is usually granted for a short time only, can prove to be not only a blessing, but a curse and a trap. Those who are on the retreat, displaced and in danger, only appear to take their lives into their own hands. They are simply busy saving their lives. Seen in this context, attempts to idealize or romanticize this situation strike me as euphemistic. For example, when talking about, I quote, Weimar on the Pacific, or the particular intensity and quality of thinking and fantasizing about flight and refuge, survival and new beginnings. Honestly, can flights really be fantasized? And what do we mean by trial migration? Interpreting the sanctuary in an artistic, metaphorical way is as seductive as it is careless. The fact is, there is no trial migration, just as there is no trial violence. Flight and displacement cannot be simulated, neither physically nor psychologically. You either live through the experience or you don't. Even art, think of its usefulness what you will, has never been trial art, whatever the conditions. Enter the homely little lady Corona, whose appearance until recently none of us expected. Unbidden, she suddenly and stubbornly puts us to the test by forcing us into an involuntary global retreat of a very different kind that in our supposedly open-minded and cosmopolitan sanctuary still awaits definition. Only one thing is certain. There never has been that much distance and time out. Today, checkpoints have been reinstalled everywhere, even in Europe. Borders are tighter than ever before. Setting out and setting forth are out of the question, which is why exile has suddenly shifted into the private sphere. The well-meaning idea of a trial migration has become obsolete for now. Reality has definitely overtaken metaphor. Lady Corona has put us on a kind of defensive that first and foremost fosters fears about our personal sinecures, about our highly private sacred spaces and property. It has referred us back to a nature with which we no longer wanted anything to do. And it has transformed the world into a protected zone where artists rarely get a breath of fresh air. Instead, it throws a surprisingly new light on the old term of inner emigration. But inner immigration, too, is something one needs to be able to afford. Or to quote Rilke, who like me like to retreat to the land of 4,000ers, to poetize the world at other people's expenses, I quote, "He who has no home now will build no more." Occasionally you hear other voices about how Lady Corona makes us all equal, about how we are finally all in the same boat and thrown back on our own resources. I wish. If only one did not know that boats and houses have long been in short supply and that charity more than ever begins at home. For we have decided to simply stay at home in our self-prescribed ivory tower, armed with masks and binoculars through which the Swiss mountains appear to be barely closer than the Villa Aurora. But what are we going to talk about when we are at home? That is, in a place where absolutely nothing happens if it is not in communication with an outside world that productively overlaps with the inner world. The creation of art depends on movement and encounters, which can be mediated only up to a point. The precisely prescribed retreat into the protective libraries and archives of yesteryear not only renders us lonely and small, but above all, rather sentimental. Little Lady Corona brandishes her magnifying glass and brings everything to light, not just our fears, but above all our self-pity, from which we craft an alibi that finally allows us to retreat from the real world and to hibernate in a refuge that makes our salvation metaphors flourish. But who wants to read Corona's poems? And who really immerses herself in her diary? Lady Corona is as realistic as she is crafty, and she has long overtaken our fictions. It is not just art she puts to the test, but with art, she does it in a particularly revealing manner. Its houses and caretakers are still there, but where are the artists? If the whole world is a refuge, the concept of the refuge becomes obsolete. If everybody and everything needs to retreat, retreating is not a productive option. The entire world has become a cloister, a ship, a prison, and the inmates have no visitors. The problem is less psychological than physical. It is physics pure and simple. Art depends on countercurrent. Creation is not coziness, and the world will not get any better if we look at it by standing still. To put it simply, the need is great, and an end to the hardship is not in sight. But need and hardship too sometimes open a window onto the world, letting in fresh air. Maybe the mask will be writing easier, and perhaps it will be stimulated by, maybe the mask will make writing easier, and perhaps I will be stimulated by my longing for a place that I will almost certainly fail to reach this year. But maybe this is not the question. The question that we have to ask, not only in fact, but in reality, is a different one and rather uncomfortable. Do I really have to travel? The answer is, of course, what else? For to this day, it is little known that those who really want to see the ocean, Atlantic or Pacific, need to go up into the Swiss mountains, because the sea cannot be seen from the sea. It is only from up here that we can grasp what it means to immerse oneself in a view, whereas below, surrounded by movement and waves, it is impossible to observe anything because everything passes by. Having said that, neither reality nor art can be fobbed off with quotations. Evasive maneuvers are fake maneuvers, just like trial migrations. For what really gets lost when we reside in the great as-if for the long haul cannot yet be told or represented. It's not just artists who cannot do so. So we can only hope that at some point new and other spaces will open up behind the shadow play, a transformed house whose caretakers will discard the ideas of the deceased ancestors and welcome their happy descendants and would-be homebodies to the fresh air of the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicitas. As there are no questions from the audience at the moment, I think I would start with a question of mine, especially after our last session with Tanja Dückers. She has described her experience as a, so to speak, trial immigration, something that you would absolutely deny exists. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, I think one easily grasp the irony in the text, and but actually there is irony involved. But I'm very serious about reflecting whether this inner trial is something possible, because and I think I reflect on it so intensely because I take the problem seriously. And I think we should not be so easygoing about terms like immigration and inner immigration, because historically these things are something totally different. And so the idea, I always felt there is some strange luxury, you know, in the idea to go to a place and then to reflect on one's loneliness. I mean, this is our free choice, and nobody forces us to go to these places. Besides the fact that nobody really likes to talk about that we get money for it. And I think this is one point that is important. And I very much enjoyed working on this text because it forced me to reflect on what I have been doing for now more than 20 years.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I myself had to think that the beauty of the fellowship, maybe at a place like Villa Aurora, is that you get more of an insight than if you would only be a tourist, because it's 3 months and you can see different perspectives. But at the same time, I think also it's very important to realize that you're still not part of that system, and that you are still kind of a visitor that is allowed to get exactly this deeper view and then do something with it, produce art, or as you said, see something from a distance. Yeah, so last year and also this year, we all felt what it meant to be an involuntary hermitage, where we were at the same time always still relying on the news from the outside world, of course. But you also mentioned in your text the difference between voluntary and involuntary hermitage, and you also answered that now a little bit. In relation to that, where would you see the similarities or differences also to exiled authors of a different time? You mentioned Weimar at the Pacific. Like, how would you maybe put this in relation to Corona time or such a fellowship?
I think one should be really careful about dramatizing the Corona case. I mean, everybody knows that we really have to struggle, you know, with the situation. But I think there's no comparison to immigration or forced involuntary immigration in the past. And the Villa Aurora is an interesting place because I remember when I got there that I, perhaps not for the first time, but more intensely, really started reading and doing some research on the situation of the writers who really had to go into that exile back then. And if you go through the diaries or through the letters, you realize how unhappy and how depressed many of them were. And because there was no personal choice involved. Still, of course, I would never deny that I point that out in my text, you know, that you have to seek a certain form of distance to understand better where you come from.
Right.
But my main point still is and remains that it's part of our profession, and it also turned into a sort of business. And it has very much to do with cultural politics. And everybody knows that. And I think it's not a very, wie sagt man, Erkenntnis, you do not need special insight to see that the cultural system, we are part of the system. But still, I think the Corona situation now, I think makes many people really reflect on the situation, and they really have to ask themselves, you know, why do I do all this traveling if nobody forces me to, you know? And so I even see something positive in the Corona situation, you know, because it forces us to reflect on these things.
Absolutely, I think so too. And I think a lot of us would not have done that if we wouldn't have been forced, to be honest. When you talk about the distance, that it's important to, for example, get up into the mountains to really see the outlines of the ocean. I am very much reminded of Leon Feuchtwanger's definition of the historic novel, of course, to draw parallels between the past and the present, to also understand the present better. And you wrote your beautiful text in May of this year. And I was wondering, do you see that there's any adjustment since that time necessary, or do you feel we are still very much in that similar situation that you felt we have been when you wrote that text in May?
I think the situation changed quite a bit. And I feel that at first, when we started when Corona started, everybody was sort of paralyzed. And I think this is going to change. And I think this is a good point. Corona became part of our everyday life. Yeah. And I think now we sort of adapt to the situation and we start drawing consequences from the situation. And the communication we have here, for example, this is a very good example. If you think about organizing a symposium like the Villa Aurora symposium now, you think about, shifting a whole lot of people, from, let's say, Berlin to Los Angeles. All these people have to fly over the ocean. And if we talk about the climate crisis and all kinds of things, I mean, traveling has come into question. So I think this is a good point. And for me, as a traveling artist, that has always, I really profited from the traveling because it's a very important part of my writing. I'm not a travel writer. I don't write travelogues in the classical sense, but I very much profit from my experiences. But still, I really have to ask myself, is this necessary, and will we keep going this way? And it has become sort of an industry also, and I think we should reflect on that. So, but now back to your question, the situation has changed quite a bit, I feel, and I think it's for me it's very interesting to read the text, because by reading or rereading the text I realize how many things already have changed again. Yeah. This is a good point, I think.
Yeah, thank you also for mentioning, and I totally agree, we have to overthink as well, like what in terms of travel is necessary. And of course, not every event, every program can be replaced via an online program, but we also talked a lot about lately the chances that we experienced for us to make our programs more accessible. So as you said, like some experiences need to be made to be carried on and maybe turned into something else. And then other things can maybe be solved in the way of, thinking about the environment and making a symposium like this still possible, even though no one, unfortunately, from our European guests could come over at the time. So that really makes sense to me. And then,
I really think that we start getting more realistic about these things. But I think there's this one point in the text, now rereading it, it comes to me, where I talk about the caretakers, this is people like you. I mean, it's very interesting what happened to the institutions. Yeah. The very moment that artists couldn't travel anymore, I think the institutions got into a deep crisis. We have, for example, the same here with the Literaturhäuser, the houses where we have readings and lectures and so on and so forth. They started having a problem about, I don't know the English word, Existenzberechtigung.
Wow. Okay, the right to exist in that sense. Like, I mean, it's a little bit a different.
They had to invent another form of presence. Right. Because they didn't have any guests anymore, but they still had to show we are here, Many people make a living on these jobs. I mean, people like you and I make a living on being your guest. So we talk about a quite complicated system of jobs here. So it sounds really nice. It says this is a retreat and a refuge, etc., etc. But it's a fact that many people make a living on that. And I mean, I think this is an important point. And of course, as artists tend to to turn things into different things. I mean, if I talk about my loneliness in a well-paid refuge, I start thinking about what am I talking about? Is this loneliness? And actually, it's not easy to talk with colleagues about these things, because I think there's also a tendency to deceive oneself, because it's our lives, and it's just it's our means of production, and it's not easy to confront oneself with this model of life, I would like to say. So I have lived this way for the last 25 years. And once in a while, I ask myself, what have I been doing there? And when I start out in the text about talking what I did, I think this is funny. I have lived in borrowed farmhouses behind northern German dikes, managed vacant keepers' lodges next to abundant railroad tracks. I mean, perhaps Tanja Dückers talked about this too. If you start thinking about what kind of crazy places are there, especially in Germany. I mean, Germany is really, I think, number one, in having all these really strange places. And then you start asking yourself, what do I do to myself, when I live in places that are not my places, not my homes? I mean, when I talked about sleeping in other people's beds, it's right. Like in the fairy tale, who slept in my bed? And I remember when I came to the villa and somebody said, well, you got the Feuchtwanger Zimmer and you sleep in Feuchtwanger's bed. And I thought, is this really inspiring?
Yeah, that's what we always also hope, that it's not a burden, but it's inspiring to basically be put into these footsteps. But thank you also for mentioning this new orientation phase. Yeah, especially for a place like Villa Aurora, we're an artist residency without artists. So then what are you doing? And sadly, we heard a lot of these stories from other international artist residencies that basically canceled the fellowships altogether that have been given out for 2020. First they rescheduled, and then a lot of them got canceled completely. We are very happy that we were able to at least ask everybody if they could maybe come in a different time, in a different year, for different terms or months. And of course, it's a little bit difficult to organize all of that, but at least I think, that was maybe a good solution and perspective for a lot of people that also had to reorganize their life in Europe. And for us, it was a chance, but also, maybe an obstacle in the beginning, but then also opened up new possibilities to develop these new programs and still give people insight in what we are doing here, inviting people, but also make either Zoom-friendly programs or show the house or something like that. It was very important. And now I see there is a question from the audience, and the question is, I wonder what the role of a community of other travelers, whether involuntary ones like the exiles in the past in LA or artist residency program participants in the present is. What is the importance of the conviviality with artist neighbors?
I'm not quite sure. Did I?
Trying to unwrap it a little bit too. I think it goes a little bit in the direction what we talked about before, the contrast between involuntarily being at a place or choosing to be in a place and then work with the results. And then the last question is, basically how's the exchange with other artists on the long run in this situation?
I thought that to me seemed the most important point. Yeah. So if the retreat becomes a recluse in the sense that you don't meet other people, I mean, it's very important. And I do not know whether the programs are very successful, but of course, I think it depends really on the initiative that you take. Yeah. And it's not very easy to get in touch with others, and it's not very easy to become part of an artist community when you spend only a short amount of time in another place. And once in a while, people try to organize sort of neighborhood, but the idea of exchange can be also very artificial.
Yeah.
For example, for me, was always very important in traveling, or even when I was teaching in other countries or in the United States. In some ways, I also try to get away from other artists. So this is an interesting point, because the idea that artists meet artists and become even more productive can be very, it can be an illusion, or it's very illusionary. I very much long to meet other people. So when I travel, actually, I try to get away from artists. I mean, I exaggerate a little bit to make it clear. And it's not so easy to get in touch with other communities. And now here comes up a very political problem that we have these times, you know, that comes with Corona again, that we feel that are we really in touch with the so-called real world? I mean, is there anything like a real world? But I think it takes a great effort to get in touch with other people, other kinds of people. And there's always a certain danger when artists communicate with artists only, because it produces another, we call it the Blase in German. I don't know in English or in American.
Yeah, it's the same.
The bubble, right. And so as much as I enjoyed being, for example, the villa is only one example and one of the better ones, I think. And I remember quite well how we were living in this bubble and how much we were enjoying the bubble. And again, and sometimes that comes with a refuge also, and with a retreat, you might even get afraid of meeting other people, because, you know, they might disturb you. They might disturb the idea of, you know, of your own work, of your own art. And if it becomes a program like an obligation, you have to meet other people, then it might turn out to be a problem again. But once in a while it works, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. And you get back home and you ask yourself, what have I been doing there? For me, it's very important, you know, when you work on a special project. And this is good about the villa, because, you know, if I remember it right, you have to apply with a project. And the project sometimes brings you to other people. If you know what you want to do, you know where to look for the right people that might help you.
Exactly. Thank you. And I do think maybe it goes also a little bit in that direction of having sometimes the distance to then be able again to reflect on their own work, that even getting away from other artists. Or maybe I hope that our system encourages a little bit this kind of exchange between different fields of art, is that we always try to bring not only writers together in one place, but filmmakers, visual artists, musicians, so that maybe there's a little bit of influence from different directions. And connected to that, and that would also be my last question, you mentioned it earlier, your stay here at Villa Aurora is almost 10 years ago now. And yeah, with everything going on, how do you feel about its influence looking back for you now in this situation?
I think it had a strong influence on my work, besides my private experiences and some friendships, you know, that are important till today. For example, I met Alexei Meshchanov, and that resulted in a trip that we took together, you know, cross country, 6 weeks through the United States, and out came a novel named Pravda, eine amerikanische Reise. And so, yeah, that was quite productive. And my first research I did when I was in the villa, you know, traveling down the West Coast and following the route of Ilfin Petrov. And that was very, very important and inspiring till today. That is definitely true. So I would not want to miss it. It's very important to point out, you know, that I wrote this text rather as a self-reflection than like a critique on writers in residence, etc., etc. But I think self-irony is very, very important, you know, until things turn into a routine that is not questioned anymore. This is, I think this is essential.
Yeah. Thank you. Essential, also a word that we have been hearing in the last 1.5 years a lot, but I do think exactly it is important to think about what is really essential for us and what drives us forward also in this maybe more rather difficult time. Thank you so much, Felicitas.
I wanted to make one more point that to me seems important is the text also helped me to reflect on how people look at artists.
Yeah.
There is, I think there's an interaction that is very interesting. So I think there's lots of illusions and strange images. This is when I try to point out that for many people, the traveling artists are like on a constant vacation. I try to point that out in the text, you know, and to make clear that we are business people and that many of us lead precarious lives. This is very, very important. And coming back to the political point that all over the world, and I think here again comes the Villa into play. You know, you have this special program of writers in exile. What is the
Voltron Fellowship?
Yeah, and this for me was very important because if you meet these people, you really get to know about situations that are much more precarious than our own ones. So to put the whole thing in a political light, I think, yeah, that's one of the things that are important for the Villa. And I think it's, that many people just have a totally distorted view on the lives of artists, of writers, and all kinds of artists.
Let's change that. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you to our audience also for joining. Thank you for the questions. Thank you so much, Felicitas, for being with us today.
Thank you, and have a good day.
And hope to see you one day back here in Los Angeles.
I will be back. I will be back to the United States next year because I'm going to teach in St. Louis, and who knows, perhaps I make it to the Pacific.
Yes, please. Okay, have a wonderful evening in Berlin.
You too. Have a good day, and thanks to the guys with the technical
staff. Thank you.